Welcome to cooking cheap, easy, and tasty meals. Last Christmas I did a recipe for my grandmother's pralines. This year I'm going to do the same recipe, but I'm going to use a somewhat different method that I think for a lot of people will be easier. The difference in this recipe is that we're going to use a mixer instead of a spoon at the end, and we're also going to put most of the ingredients in at the beginning. The only thing we're going to add at the end will be vanilla and pecans. But at the beginning, we're going to start out, turn it on, and we're going to melt some butter. This is 1 stick of butter, which is 1/2 cup. Now, I'm going to try some different things this year. This is just a plain stick of butter, and I'm going to go ahead and melt it while the pot's warming up. Later on, I'm going to try and use brown butter to see if that makes a difference in the flavor. It should make the flavor somewhat richer, but I'm not going to do that today. So far, pretty simple. Now, the one thing I would suggest, make sure your pot is fairly large, has fairly deep sides, because what's going to happen is it's going to rise up as it cooks, because the temperature it has to get to, it will cause it to swell, and it will overflow if you're not paying attention. So be sure you have a big pot. You could use a much larger pot than this, it'd be fine, but this is convenient for me and I've done it in this pot. I just have to remember to stir it regularly. Okay, as you can see. Now, some people will say that the butter makes a difference, and it may make a difference, but it doesn't make a difference to me. I've tried Kerrygold, which I love. It's a delicious butter, and I've tried basically food store, just regular supermarket butter and other brands, and I truly cannot tell a difference in the final flavor. Even though butter is a big part of this recipe, I just can't find a difference. So I'm not going to worry about that. Now, once the butter melts, we're going to add our other ingredients. So again, 1 stick of butter, which is 1/2 cup, okay? The next thing we're going to add is 2 cups of sugar. We're going to stir it in. Then we're going to add 1/2 cup of milk. And I've tried everything from whole milk to skim milk, and they all work. Slightly different flavor, so you may use what you have, and when you want to try it again, get whole milk or 2% or whatever you're comfortable using, and see what you think you think it changes the flavor. I personally don't think it changes the flavor. The next thing we're going to add is Karo, or corn syrup. This happens to be Karo's corn syrup. I'm adding 1/2 of a cup corn syrup. So basically 1/2 cup of butter, 1/2 cup of Karo, or corn syrup, 2 cups of sugar, 1/2 cup of milk, and the last thing we'll add will be a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Now, I don't think the baking powder does anything more than help it to caramelize. I'm not convinced. I've made it with and without it. It gets a little darker with the baking soda, and it seems to caramelize a little better with the baking soda. So that's your basic ingredients. Now the next step in this is to break up the baking soda, but once it starts cooking, it's going to be fine. Now, as far as testing the temperature, you're going to need at least a candy thermometer. I have quit using a candy thermometer and am using a laser tester that I got that was fairly inexpensive off of Amazon, and it seems to give me a more accurate reading on the temperature. Now, I'm going to turn this down to about 4, and I'm going to turn it down a little lower. See, it's starting to bubble. This is my infrared thermometer. There's several different ones. I ended up having to get this for work, and it has been very useful, as I have used it for all sorts of testing of things around the house, in my car, but also for cooking. And it really is great for testing the temperature of stuff. And notice, if you don't stir it, it's going to raise up the side really fast. Actually, it's raised considerably, doing it considerably faster than it did without the baking soda. But I still think the baking soda adds a little something in the caramelization. Now, one of the things that's interesting is if you take a little of this syrup and save it as you cook it, it's hot, so be careful with it. But it also gives you a good feel for how the mixture changes over time. The color will change, the texture of it changes, and what you're shooting for is a 240 degrees, 241, 42 degrees. And at that point, I'm going to take it off and go to the next step. Now, after this point, the only difference is we put the butter in at the beginning, whereas in the other method, you add it at the end. But this is still easier because basically you just start off with everything in the pan, and all you have to do is think about stirring it. And if it cooks too fast, if it's getting too hot too fast, just lower the temperature. And truthfully, the longer you let it cook, the richer the flavor. It will caramelize more and get darker if you cook it longer, even though you're cooking at a lower temperature. Now, the truth is, it has a lot to do with how much time you have. But it is something you do have to pay attention to. Now, the difference in how I'm going to prepare this is based on the fact that pralines are basically a fudge, and there are a lot of different ways of making fudge. And one of them, basically all of them, require that at the end of the mixing you beat them to get air into them. Well, this time I'm going to actually move it to another bowl, let it cool a little bit, and I'm going to use an actual beater, set of beaters, to get the air into it. You can certainly use a stand mixer if you're comfortable with that. That's certainly fine. But I'm just going to use a regular hand mixer and move them into just into a metal bowl. Important to remember, this stuff is hot. Don't lose sight of that this mixture will take your skin right off. Keep your kids away from it. Watch your hands. Don't do anything dangerous with it because it will flat tear you up. I've got this down to about 2 and it's still cooking pretty fast. Current temperature is 215. Doing quite well. Now, I've seen recipes where people take the pecans and cook them a little bit, brown them in the oven a little bit. Just toasted is the correct word, but toasting them in the oven probably does enhance their flavor. I don't have any real fresh ones. All I have are frozen ones right now, although in the next couple weeks I feel sure I'm going to have some fresh ones because the place I get pecans from, which is Double P Farms, it's in the notes, has just started selling fresh pecans. 1st of November, that's when they start making them available. And fresh pecans are so much better than frozen ones. Everything about them is better. Although you can use certainly any kind of nut you prefer. I grew up eating these with pecans, and it's funny, I didn't like pecans growing up, but I really do now. But pecans seem to be the only thing that is right to use in this. The sugars are definitely beginning to caramelize, slowly. And this is going to take 30 minutes at least to get to where I want it to be. So I'm going to come back when it's closer temperature is at 220, so we still got about 20 degrees. I'll be back in a little while with that. Okay, it's been 15 minutes, and you can see that this is getting darker, bubbling up a little differently. It's not as rising as high. Little swirls of brown in it, caramelizing. It'll begin to boil down a little bit. The temperature is now 237. We want to not get it past about 243, but so we're starting to see it's getting up in that range. And when it happens, it's going to happen quick. So you got to be ready. So check it. I'd say it's about ready. Now, the biggest problem you're going to have is that this is really hot. And when it reaches the temperature that you want to move it, it's going to be hot. So you got to be extremely careful, and you're going to pour it into another bowl to stop it from cooking. Because what's happening is that the pan is still hot, and you're going to still see that's going to cook. Now we're going to let this continue cooling for a minute, but before we do that, we're going to stir in about a tablespoon of vanilla. So be careful, you'll notice it'll kind of boil off. I'm sure it's the heat is boiling the alcohol out. But just get it mixed. Now at this point, what you're going to do is you're going to wait 10 or 15 minutes and let it just cool on its own. Don't do anything. Just let it sit there. The other thing we're going to do differently is instead of pulling them out by teaspoons, we're going to put them into a pan. So this is an 8x8 pan. You want to butter it. Whatever size pan you use, you want to butter it really well, bottom and sides, so that the candy will not stick when you go to pull it out. So all I've done is got a tablespoon of butter, and I'm rubbing it all over the sides. I want a good coating of it. You could use avocado oil or something if you prefer that, but I figured you got so much butter in this now, why would you worry about that? So make sure you got it covered really well. And when we finish, we're going to pour this into this pan to let it cool. And then we're going to cut pieces out of it rather than take pieces out onto wax paper, which is a little different than what the original way we did this was. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do is take my mixer and start. And all I'm trying to do is get air into it. And in the process, what I'm doing is cooling it off. That's better. All I'm trying to do is help cool it down and get air into it. Now what you're going to notice, it's really shiny right now, just like it was in the recipe where you do it by hand. And as time goes by, it'll begin to gloss over. Remember, be careful about this metal pan. Now, it's not hot up here. But pay attention, because down near the bottom, it's really hot. If you do this in a stand mixer, it'd be a lot easier because you wouldn't have to hold it. But it's going to take a few minutes, and you'll notice it'll get thicker and it'll start glossing over. You can already see a little bit of that. You just got to watch for a good point to, when it starts to gloss over is the time you want to finish it up and put it in the pan before it gets hard. a look. Yep, starting to get sticker. I'm going to dump in my pecans. And gently mix these up. Make sure they get coated well. And they're going to help lower the temperature too. All right, now I'm going to take my pan, and I am going to get a hot pad, or a glove actually, a hot glove. Grab hold of this, and I'm going to dump that into this pan. It's already starting to thicken up and get hard, which is good, because that's what you want. It is still really hot. Be very careful, don't get it on you, because it will take your skin off, or at least make you wish your skin came off. Now, when I was growing up, this was everybody's favorite part, the bowl, which I guess is universally true when you're making something like this. The bowl is the best part. Now, that's pretty smooth. Now, what we're going to do is let that cool. And once it cools, we're going to cut it. So we'll be back in a little while and we will cut it. You can cut the pieces any size you like. I cut mine into small ones because I figured 1 or 2 bites is enough for one of these. Cut easily, but you might want to score it before it gets too hard so you have an idea of how you want to cut it. Another thing you could do is put parchment paper in the pan so you could easily remove it and cut it outside the pan. That would certainly make it easier in some ways. But these are great little pralines, and I'm going to try a couple other methods, and I'll share my results with you later, closer to Christmas. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and give us a like. Thank you.